out right now. Okay, and we are. And now I will start as soon as the time changes over. I'll start the countdown, which could be any moment. And I think actually people who are, because we've gone live now on YouTube, the announcement goes out and people will start joining the live stream. There we go. The countdown is starting. So,
and that starts to rotate your yin yang.
yeah. Yeah. And I think if you were to log into the actual live on the, oh, maybe there's still a delay. If I were to go to, well, I better not do it because if I open too many windows now, it causes problems. But I can tell you this, there are people already waiting for us and they can hear us and they can actually even see us.
All right, that's fine.
Then it just means that they know that we haven't officially started yet. So in any case, the good news is everything is working smoothly.
And you have someone on your end who will take care of the questions.
Yeah, I have a team of about 4 people, 4 or 5 people, because the questions go through the chat window so fast. It's hard for any single person to keep up with them all. Then they will take those questions and copy them onto a separate Google Doc that I have to look at, and I choose the best questions from the Google Doc to pass on to you. But I think you probably would like to make an opening statement, I imagine.
I can do that.
Yeah.
So you'll introduce me and I'll say something?
Yeah. And then we'll go for about 90 minutes just fielding the questions. And there's already a list of questions.
Okay, I thought that when I begin talking, I'll say something about who I am and why I'm here.
That's good.
Then I'm going to talk a little, say 2 sentences or a little more about remote viewing and how I think that works briefly.
And you may recall that I'm titling this event Limitless Mind, because I know your interests go well beyond remote viewing.
You can probably see that I have a Limitless Mind poster over my head.
Oh, well, right now the window is very tiny, so it's hard for me to see it because I'm sharing, because the countdown takes up most of the window. But what I should do is, no, I should get, okay. Yeah, lots of questions are coming in already, Russell.
Okay, you know that Bigelow is having a contest for essays on survival after life.
I do know. In fact, I sent out you should have gotten the notice from me.
I have it in front of me. I was going to read that.
Okay. Are you planning to enter?
I am not. I don't have the credentials. I haven't published anything on survival, and I have not had a direct experience.
We did a video about your experience of Elizabeth.
Well, that was really, Jane had the experience and told me about it.
Yeah. But you were part of it. You confirmed it. In any case, I've entered.
Good. So Jane was the experiencer and I was the confirmation.
Mhm.
So she can write something if she wants to.
I bet Jane will enter. I believe they're going to get hundreds of very high quality essays submitted to them.
But they will filter them. That is, I was going to enter until I got to the entry page, and you make an application to be part of this, and then they screen your applications and say whether or not you have the qualifications to write an essay they want to read.
Yeah. Yeah, I did that. My essay was, or my application was approved. As a matter of fact, Russell, Bigelow actually gave an interview in which he was asked what kind of a person would be qualified to enter your contest. And he actually said, well, an example of a highly qualified person would be Jeffrey Mishlove.
Well, that's terrific. Yeah, I have no, see, I published Meyer's book, Survival
You
After
sure
Poverty.
did.
Yeah.
You remember who wrote the foreword?
Who wrote the foreword to that?
I did.
I'm happy to know that.
At your request, as a matter of fact.
Thank you.
Adds to my credentials.
But I don't think
an interpretive introduction.
But I don't think I have qualifications. After reading what they want, I don't think I have qualifications.
Well, I think the competition is going to be very stiff. You're going to get probably people from the University of Virginia, where they are doing a lot of serious research. You're going to get many spiritualists and people from the Society for Psychical Research who have been looking into survival very deeply their whole lives.
I agree with, that's why I thought that I was not qualified. I would not make the cut compared with all the people who have devoted their lives to survival research. I'm not that person.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's going to be very tough competition. And I imagine that this is going to spur the whole field of survival research forward.
And you also want 2,500 words, which is way more than I'm interested in writing.
Yeah. Well, that's the
25,000 words.
That's the maximum, not in counting references, however. There's no minimum.
No, but if they're thinking about 25,000 words, it's like a lengthy journal article.
Very lengthy. It would be about 80 typewritten pages, I think.
Yep. So I take a pass on that.
We got about 2 minutes to go here.
I'm working on a new ESP game I told you about, I think. The ESP, the remote viewing trainer.
Oh.
Which gives you pictures of objects to look at rather than 4 squares. This will be Stargate remote viewing trainer.
So it'll be an app for the iPhone, huh?
Exactly. It'll be similar to the one I already have, but it'll be pictures rather than squares.
Well, you know, Russell, you personally have done an awful lot to advance the field. And that app is one example of several I can think of.
Thank you. I still get a couple or 3 letters a week from that app that's been up there for a decade. People want to tell me how they're doing.
We've got about a minute to go.
So I will just briefly describe the Bigelow thing.
Okay.
Unless you, well, I'll do it. I'm queued up to do it.
Sure. You just make sure you give out the website so that if people want to apply, they.
I don't have the website. I have the name of what he's trying to do.
Well, that's enough. The Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies. Anybody can Google it. 30 seconds, Russell. Well, you're looking at the same countdown timer.
I am.
Yeah. Let's see. All right, we already have about 150 people logged in. And 3, 2, 1. Okay. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove, host of New Thinking Aloud, and I'm honored today to be with my dear friend, Russell Targ, who is a pioneer in the field of remote viewing, and not only that, a pioneer in as well in the computerized applications of ESP testing and measuring. Russell has had a lifelong interest in the field. He has made many, many contributions, including publishing a whole series, or I should say republishing a whole series of important forgotten books in the field of parapsychology. If you go to the New Thinking Aloud listings, you'll see that we've done in the past many interviews, probably 10 or so, interviews covering his interests in remote viewing, his documentary Third Eye Spies, his profound interest in Buddhism and Buddhist psychology. So today he's here to answer your thoughtful questions. Welcome, Russell.
I'm very happy to be here with you. I don't know how I feel about the introduction that says, ask me anything, but I'll do the best I can. The easy thing I can tell you is that I just got a flyer from Robert Bigelow's organization. They're having a contest where they're searching for the best evidence for survival of afterlife. Excuse me. I hope I don't choke all through the interview. Bigelow's looking for the best evidence for survival of the afterlife, and he wants essay applications that must be received by February 28th. This is $1 million contest, and you send it to Robert Bigelow, best evidence for survival of the afterlife. And the thing that has to be in by the end of February is an application for an application. That is, they expect to get hundreds of interested people, and you have to qualify to be a person who will write an essay for them. So if you would like to do that, you have to quickly write into Bigelow and say, I'm a lifetime researcher in survival research, so you should allow me to write an essay for you. And if they like your appeal, then they will allow you to write an essay.
The minimum requirement, as I understand, is that you need to have been engaged in investigating, exploring the question of human survival after bodily death for at least the last 5 years.
You know, they're looking for people who have published stuff. It's not significant. It's not satisfactory if you had a meeting with the apparition of grandma after she died. That will not get you on board.
Well, Russell, the very first question from Julie Welchel asks you, what are your thoughts about the contest? You think it's a good thing?
What are my thoughts about?
The fact that this contest is happening, this essay competition.
Well, I'm in favor of survival research. I think that the evidence is very strong that some aspect of our personality survives. I published this lengthy book by F.W. Myers called Human Personality and the Survival of Bodily Death. And reading many of his anecdotes in that, perhaps I published a condensed version. It's about 800 pages. And many of the items in that are like long distance calls from the dead. He had a proxy interview with a medium. That is, he was smart enough so that Myers doesn't go sit with the medium because the hazard is the medium will read the mind of Myers and feed back what he knows. So he sends his servant to the medium. The medium said, "Oh yes, I'm in contact with a friend of yours, and he wants to remind you of the trip that you had to Gibraltar. You and he sat at a table and looked at the women and looked at the sailboats, and you, Myers, fancied my walking stick with a sword in it. It was a sword cane. And now that I'm dead, I don't need that wonderful sword cane anymore. So if you go to my mother's house and tell her that you had a meeting with me, and I said that you, Myers, can ask her for my sword cane, and she will find it standing up in the hall closet." And I thought that was quite a lot of data to come through a post-mortem channel. And Myers then relates that he went to the mother of his friend, and yes, indeed, she remembered the cane, thought it was very dangerous, and she went to the closet, and the two of them found the cane, and she gave it to Myers, which he still has. So that struck me as a very high-class example of information from the dead, which is free of the usual criticisms that this kind of thing happens. And I won't go through the criticisms. For example, the medium was not reading Myers' mind. The medium didn't know who Myers was looking for, and so forth. So we relate. That's one of the many, many things we relate. And I've read read lots of books about survival research, and this is one of my favorite instances, which is why I'm able to think of it as soon as you ask the question.
Well, I might add that you asked me to write the introduction to that book, which I did, and you urged me in writing the introduction to pay special attention to the many communications that came from Myers after his own death that ran for, as a matter of fact, about 30 years after Myers died.
And those are the cross correspondence cases where Myers would give fragmentary data to various famous mediums and researchers in England and America after he died. And the interesting part of these is that he would give pieces of information like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and you needed all the pieces put together. You need a piece from him and a piece from her and a piece from them, and you could snap those together. And when you had all of them, you would then have a message. And that was very strong circumstantial evidence that this is not something that one of the mediums or the researchers happen to make up. So the cross correspondence cases which we discuss are, again, very, very strong evidence that some aspect of personality survives.
Here's
somewhere.
a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt you, Russell?
Well, I was going to say they survive somewhere. That is, the person, and I have other experiences where very good circumstantial evidence that you have a contemporary person whose personality resides and is able to communicate and give you information. But as a physicist, I say, okay, the data looks pretty good. Where could that person be? That is, she's not on this planet. She's given contemporary information, so she's not in the future. So it's as though she's in some kind of additional space-time where other psychic phenomena can take place. Elizabeth Rauscher and I, years ago, developed a model of psychic functioning which requires a 8-dimensional space-time. We're not making up some additional dimensions. We're saying we live in a familiar 4-dimensional space-time that we all know about, and each of those dimensions has a real part and an imaginary part. And Minkowski knew about this at the time he was helping Einstein work on relativity. So the idea of complex space-time was developed in the early 1900s. So it's as though the deceased person's personality resides in this complex space-time along with other psychic functioning.
It's a very good hypothesis. Here to change pace a little bit is a question from Joe Bananas 37, who asks, when did you first develop your interest in psi? And what is it that spurred that interest?
Well, I first got interested in psychic abilities when Robert Rosenthal walked into my 12th grade biology class in high school. Rosenthal was a big junior at the time, and I was just a little sophomore, but the biology teacher allowed Rosenthal, I should say, is now a distinguished professor, had been at Harvard for a decade and is now at Riverside College in California. And he invented the Pygmalion Phenomena, which is basically that researchers tend to get the result that they want in psychology experiments by cueing subliminally the person to give them the data. So I won't go into that. Anyway, Rosenthal is now a well-known psychologist, distinguished psychologist, but back in 1948, he walked in my classroom with a deck of ESP cards and showed us what Rhine was doing with the Zener cards. And that greatly excited me because I was already an enthusiastic card player. And I had an idea that something like ESP was going on anyway from my own experience. So Rosenthal gave me the okay to learn about that. And since I lived in New York, I could then walk down to the Society for Psychical Research on Central Park West, introduce myself as a 14-year-old high school student. What have you got that I could read about ESP? And they helped me subscribe to the journal and were very polite to me. And then I read psychic ESP journals for the next 50 years. But what started me was Rosenthal walking in my classroom, I should say. And then I continued to do magic for many years, where I would stand on the stage and pretend to read the minds of people in the audience, which of course I was not doing. I was doing a trick so that I knew what they had in their mind. But I frequently had information come to me pertaining to what the person's house looked like. So I knew from my trick that they were looking for their dog. And I would say, who's looking for your dog? Hold up your hand. And somebody would say, yes, can you help me find Fido? And I said, I don't know, but I see your house and it has a stairway going upstairs and a beautiful handmade patchwork quilt on the bed. Is that your house? And she said, my God, how could you know that? I said, well, that's part of being a magician. And that was sort of my introduction to remote viewing 50 years before I started the program. But I had really a lifelong interest in psychic stuff. And my father published many books on that field. He published a biography of Helena Blavatsky, which I read early on. And when I was 20, I joined the Theosophical Society in New York. As soon as I was out of college, I was in Columbia studying physics, and I could go to the Theosophical Society in Midtown Manhattan, and that got me involved in Kundalini meditation, which is a very exciting, interesting, somewhat dangerous form of meditation that really makes it clear to you when you're on the beam for doing meditation. So I did that for a number of years. And then in 1972, I had the idea to start a research program. I've been doing laser physics for 15 years at that point. And I was a pioneer in the development of the laser in the 1950s. then in 1972, I was quite well known and had a chance to meet with Werner von Braun at NASA and Kit Green at the CIA, both of whom I had done work for, and said, I'm interested in starting an ESP program. I told von Braun that we might be able to teach astronauts how to psychically get in touch with their spacecraft. This is like in the science fiction stories, on one of the semanticists says, nothing has to be true, it just has to sound true. So I told von Braun, we might be able to teach astronauts how to anticipate accidents in the spacecraft. I told Kit Green of the CIA, we might help you develop a psychic agent who could find hostages. And with that little preamble and zero data, both those guys agreed to give me money to start a program about $2 million a year at SRI, which is what we did in 1972.
That's quite a story, Russell. Firat Araz asks, regarding the military research work, is there still anything about particular remote viewing sessions you have to hold back, or is everything declassified already?
I'm not holding anything back. Now, I left the program after the first decade. So I founded the program with Hal Puthoff in 72. By 82, everything was so classified that I couldn't even publish unclassified things that we did. So from 72 to 82, we wrote a couple of papers, one in Nature, one in the Proceedings of the IEEE. Hal and I wrote a book, and there was no problem. But by 82, everything was getting so applied. Everything we did was operational, and they wouldn't let me publish anything anymore. So I left the program in 82. Consequently, there are doubtless application things from 82 to 95 that I don't know anything about. But from my situation, I can tell you anything you want to know during my time there.
And here's a related question. This is from Sarah Beth, who says, when you were doing this work that was classified, did you have to communicate in some kind of coded fashion? How did you prevent people who were aware, for example, of your other published work from knowing about the classified aspects?
Well, people knew about the classified aspects. That it was not a secret. For example, our cover was blown when Charlie Tart applied for secret clearance because they went to all of Charlie's friends throughout the psychology community and said, Dr. Tart is applying for a secret clearance to work with Targ and Puthoff at SRI. So at that moment, it was no longer secret that we had a secret program at SRI. The only thing that was really secret at that point is what specifically we were doing and the fact that it was CIA who was paying for it.
Okay, we're getting lots of good questions. Here's somebody called Cosmic Spirit who is asking if it's possible to differentiate remote viewing from seeing things in your dreams or closing your eyes and having a fantasy and focusing on a movie screen while meditating or daydreaming.
Well, remote viewing is a particular protocol. People can have all kinds of psychic experiences. If you're doing remote viewing, then you have to follow a particular protocol. There are lots of ways of being psychic. I have many high quality precognitive dreams, and I've become astute in separating out dreams that are from my memory or imagination or wishful thinking, separating out those dreams from dreams that are very unusually clear or bizarre. So if I have a dream which is really very, very strange and bizarre, I assume that that's a precognitive dream which will come true. If I dream about winning the Publishers Clearinghouse jackpot, which sends me mail every week, well, that's something that's in my thought patterns because they send me these things every week, and I think it would be nice to win $1 million from them. But that's sort of in my memory stream. And if I dream about Publishers Clearinghouse, I would know in advance that that's a dream filled with noise. So my criteria, I don't write down my dreams. If I think I'm having a dream that will come true, then I tell my wife Patricia, and if it comes true, then it goes down in the psychic, in the Akashic records as a correct dream, and I don't have to count the ones that were incorrect. For example, not long ago, I know telling you a dream is like telling people about your last acid trip. That may not be that interesting, but I'm sitting here with my screen right in front of me, and I had a dream that I went to Esalen for a conference at the Big House, which is something I've done many, many times over 40 years. And I couldn't go this time because I didn't have enough money. Esalen's gotten very expensive. And I got to the base of the Big House and I couldn't pay the $1,000 it cost to go into Esalen. And since I haven't been to Esalen for a decade, I'm not thinking about Esalen. So that was a dream. I thought that was pretty strange, charged dream. Doesn't pertain to anything on my horizon. So I told my wife about it. Next thing I do is get a cup of coffee and sit down at my computer here and see if I've got any mail. And I had a letter from Jeff Kripal, who's a philosopher of religion who I've seen at Esalen in times past. And he sent me an early screener of a movie he's made of work at Esalen. And I started the reel playing in front of me. And the film opens up with all of us sitting together in the Big House, including me. So within an hour of my telling my wife I had a dream about Esalen and I wasn't able to go to a meeting at the Circle in the Big House. Last time I had done that was 12 years ago. But within an hour of telling my wife about the dream, I got a chance to see that very thing on my screen. So I felt comfortable giving myself a hit for that, because for the reasons I've just described. But that's not remote viewing. That's having a precognitive dream. Remote viewing is sitting quietly trying to describe some distant place or some distant object, usually with an interviewer helping you. An interviewer is between you and the scene. That is, calling him an interviewer is almost as a hyphenated word would be appropriate. He's like an interviewer. I did not do any psychic stuff for the program, but I sat in the dark for a decade helping other people develop their psychic ability. Consequently, I got very good at that particular thing. That is, I've now done dozens and dozens of workshops where I will stand on the stage and coax people to try and describe some hidden thing. And that I have anomalously good success doing that. So the aspect of that that's remote viewing is I'm telling, in that case, I know the answer. So we can't consider that a double-blind trial. But in all the things I did at SRI, I did not know the answer. So if I'm sitting with Jeffrey and I'm saying, where is hell hiding? And what Jeffrey says to me does not sound like remote viewing, I can just stop him right there and say, I understand what you're saying. That does not sound like remote viewing to me. Let's take a break and start over. Just tell me what you're experiencing. And that's the part that I play. I'm the psychic travel agent. And in general, the most successful remote viewing programs have involved an interviewer, and the job of the interviewer is to keep the viewer on the track to avoid guessing or doing analysis or other kinds of guessing, grasping, analysis, so forth, anything other than telling me what you're experiencing. So if I'm able to do that, then I can be very valuable in keeping the person on the track. So if you're having a daydream or seeing something in your mind's eye, that can indeed be psychic, but remote viewing, the great success we had in our first decade is because you have a experienced interviewer keeping the person on the track, even though it's important to know I have no idea where the person is hiding. It could be a kidnapped American soldier someplace in the Middle East, or a downed airplane someplace in Africa, or a weapons factory in Russia, all of which I have no idea whatsoever about. Consequently, I can say whatever I want to say because I don't know anything, but I do know what remote viewing sounds like, so I can provide valuable information about states of mind. So the first series we did with Pat Price, who was a psychic police commissioner, we did 9 trials with Price, frequently with the CIA on board, hiding someplace in the Bay Area with Hal. So they typically, our very first trial, Pat Price and me in a screen room, Hal and Kit Green from the CIA went to hide someplace, randomly chosen targets, someplace in the Bay Area. So I'm sitting with Price and said, okay, it's 9 o'clock. They're at their site now. What do you see? What can you tell me? And he said, I close my eyes. I don't see a damn thing, Russ. I said, oh my God, what a terrible way to begin the program. And the contract monitor is right there. But I already, even though this is my number 1 trial, I had an intuition of what to do. So I said, okay, Pat, Hal has this green Toyota. Why don't you just follow the green car out of the parking lot? Of course, the car is left half an hour ago. So I tell Pat, why don't you just follow the green car out of the parking lot and see where it goes? And he said, oh yeah, I got that. It goes south on Middlefield Road, and they've gone to a park and they're standing by a water purification plant. I see a square body of water about 80 feet square, and rectangular body of water about 80 by 100. I misspoke. He said, I saw a round body of water about 100 feet in diameter, and a rectangular body of water 60 by 80. And off to the side, there's a big storage tank, 2 storage tanks, very high. This must be a water purification plant. So that was remote viewing number 1 at SRI 1973. And they had gone to a children's water park where they had a round pool and a rectangular pool with not a water purification plant. So for a decade, I described this, that Price described this children's park very accurately, had the dimensions correct. And because of his experience as a police commissioner and a building contractor, he made it into a water purification plant. That was my contribution. And a decade later, I got a picture book from the city of Palo Alto showing what the city looked like 100 years ago when Rinconada Park used to be a water purification plant. And in their photograph of the setup 100 years ago, there was indeed a 75-foot tall pair of water towers, exactly where Price had put them in his contemporary drawing. So what we know from that is that in the future, when I say, tell me the pictures, surprising images that come to you about the contemporary situation at the target site. Don't go 75 years in the past or in the future. Tell me what's going on now. So that would be a case where the interviewer is slightly helpful, because if I had not been there, it'd just be an error. He wouldn't have gotten anywhere. Price was a very psychic guy. He came with his whole scrapbook full of pictures from his life's work as a police commissioner, sending the squad car out to catch the crook, who was a frightened man someplace in the city of Burbank. And that's what he did for a living. So we knew that he had a lifetime experience doing psychic stuff, but he required evidently a little help to get started in this laboratory thing that did not have the charge of finding the criminal.
Russell, here's a question. I think it's related to your work with Pat Price, and I think it's also related to an incident in the movie Third Eye Spies. It says, please tell us about that day breaking into the NSA site Sugar Grove, and how did that change your working relationship with the CIA, the DIA, and the DOD? Did they arrest you or fund you?
Well, that's a very insightful questions. The good news is Price was able to break in psychically. We were given the coordinates of the Sugar Grove facility, which is a NSA listening post in Virginia. And Price was able to describe what it looked like, draw some of the features, go into the basement, find a filing cabinet that contained documents about naming the facility and several other classified names that were used. So when all of this was revealed to Kit Green from the CIA, he then took it to the owner of the site, which is the NSA, and the NSA was sore as hell, that mainly sore with Kit Green. Why would you target your psychics in California on a top secret listening post in Virginia? Who do you think you are? And we then had a visit from the CIA and the DIA come to SRI and wanting to know who we are and why we did that. And Kit Green's answer is, well, I didn't actually target them on the Sugar Grove site. I didn't know it was there. I targeted them on the log cabin of a friend of mine half a mile away over the hill. So then they turned to Pat Price and said, if you're so psychic, why didn't you describe the log cabin? That was your target. He said, well, as I came in at 50,000 feet, a psychic wants to describe the most exciting thing. And the more attention you pay to hiding things, the more it shines like a beacon in psychic space. Memorable words. So the reason he didn't describe the cabin, he said, and why he described the Sugar Grove facility, and the deal was he named it as Sugar Grove, which was then a classified name for the site. And the whole thing cooled down, and indeed, we never got any dough from NSA, and that's another story. But we did continue to get money from the CIA. NSA was interested in what we were doing, and they didn't want to show. I said we could read give us your best code. They said, we're not going to let you see any code. I said, no, we don't have to see it. Just send us something with your best code, put it in a top secret folder. We don't have to touch the folder or open it. You can give it to the classified receptionist. She'll just keep it in the safe, and we'll mark it read by Stargate and send it back to you. And that so freaked them out that they didn't want to even talk to us anymore. The idea that we not only didn't have to look at the code to try and break it, we did not even have to open the envelope. And my wife has since done something very much like that, where I was teaching at a workshop in Italy, which I did several times, and she was in a workshop where the participants would each be given, I have to write down a question in an envelope, and this is all in Italian. And Patricia did a very good job at both reading the question and providing a appropriate answer in English. So it's very much like reading the CIA. I sort of looked 10 years into the future and realized that a person doesn't have to look at the thing written in code. If you just hold the envelope, that's sufficient.
Okay, Russell, this is a very interesting question from Crash the Click, who says, since you've done so much work with remote viewers, how much credibility would you give to some of the statements being made by people today in the remote viewing community, and actually for years, I think, with regard to the claims that there are secret underground bases holding UFOs and extraterrestrials?
Well, thus far, everything I've told you is true. So I don't know. I really don't know anything about extraterrestrials. Pat Price once gave us a worldwide sketch of UFO activity in Alaska, in Australia, in Mexico, and someplace else. And the CIA was very interested in his UFO base in Australia, because that corresponded to a place that they had been looking at from suspected UFO activity. But I was not involved in that, and yes, Pat Price was very, very interested, and I did not follow that up.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Do you think that the U.S. government has progressed? This is a question from Payam Al-Abid. Do you think the U.S. government has made any progress in the field of remote viewing?
Well, our program ended in 1995. I don't know of any subsequent work. The program worked quite well. We found a lot of things. We found downed airplanes, kidnapped hostages. We reported on the health of the American ambassador who was kidnapped with the Iranian hostages. The psychic was able to say he's very sick, but he's going to be released shortly, and that was all true. So we've done a lot of operational things that people were quite impressed with. In our film, Third Eye Spies, Kit Green does say, from people he's talked to, he believes that work is still going on at the CIA, but they haven't talked to me. So I don't, in fact, I'm the last person they would talk to. In the film, we'd say that, I asked, why was it necessary for Pat Price to leave SRI? We were doing such good work for you. And what Ken Chris says on camera is that we really didn't trust you, Russell, because you were such a believer, that you came into the program believing in ESP, and we thought you were a bad influence on Price. There's no telling what the two of you might get up to. So we felt that we had to get Price into a more sequestered situation. They brought him to West Virginia and a farmhouse there where he was a pretend farmer. And last time I saw him, he was feeding the animals and closing the stock gates. And a month later, he was dead. Mysterious circumstances.
Russell, here's a question from Laura Newbert, who's one of our volunteers, and she asks, for people who are just beginning, do you recommend any remote viewing trainings? And if so, what kind of training would you recommend?
Well, remote viewing is very easy to do. So there are a lot of people who are offering training. Paul Smith was the director, Major Smith was director of the Army program at Fort Meade, the Stargate program. So he was a very experienced viewer, very experienced teacher. I don't know what he's doing because he does not publish anything. None of the Stargate people who is, in fact, since I left SRI, I was going to say no one has published anything, but that's not true. Ed May continued to work for a decade after I left SRI, and he is still publishing things. But outside of Ed, nobody is publishing remote viewing data from the many people who are teaching. So none of the teachers are publishing. Even when I was just doing workshops in Italy and people were doing so amazingly well, I would publish my work because I felt that that's important to do. But to answer your questions, if you're looking for a teacher, I would say find Paul Smith, who lives in Utah. Paul H. Smith is a amiable, honest guy, fun to be with, very knowledgeable. I do not know what he charges, but if you don't want to do that, you could buy my book, The Reality of Esp, which has a chapter on how to work with a friend, where you and the friend will hide little objects, and then each of you take turns describing your friend's object. And I have a chapter to describe how to do that in a sanitary way so you don't wind up reading. You don't want to teach yourself how to read the mind of your friend. So you should when you put objects together, you should say, get 3 objects in 3 bags, so that when you put an object on the table and say, Russell, what have I got here? You don't know what's in your bag, because a psychic will always take the easiest route. So if you know the answer, then the easiest way for me to get that information is easier for me to read your mind than to look into the bag or to look into my own future. So I have a chapter in Reality of Esp describing how to do that. And if that sounds very simple, it's because learning to be psychic learning to do remote viewing is a natural ability and is very easy. So the idea is if you go to Google and search on remote viewing in quotation marks, you find 2 million pages on remote viewing, which is quite stunning. And the reason is remote viewing is very easy. So people have the experience, I'm going to learn how to do remote viewing. They learn how to remote viewing and they say, that was very easy. I think I can set up shop teaching people how to do remote viewing. So I can recommend Paul because I know him, but remote viewing is quite easy. If you have a friend who is offering to teach you remote viewing, start with your friend. You don't need credentials. But don't spend a lot of money because it's a natural ability.
Here's a change of pace question from Sniffing Dog Art Official, who's asking about Ted Owens, the PK man. And he knows that you and Hal turned over your files on that case to me. You were eager to get it out of your hands at SRI. And he's asking, do you have any regrets about turning over the PK man case to Jeffrey?
No, I'm happy I turned them over to Jeffrey. We have a top secret program and can't tell anybody what we're doing at all. And the thing that Owens was most interested in is getting publicity about what he's doing. So that was a mismatch, that he's looking for publicity, we're looking for secrecy. And Jeffrey thought that he could work with Owens, and it had a good outcome.
And here's a question, a very interesting question from David Vidal, who says, can remote viewers know if they are being viewed? And if so, how can we stop someone else from viewing us?
I think that you become sensitive to if you're remote, whether or not you're being remote viewed. I don't know that that's true. I had one instance, which I don't think made it into the film, where I was, I got to start this at the beginning. We were asked to describe Brezhnev's office in the Kremlin. This is working with Hella Hammett. Hella, the psychic photographer, a good friend of mine. Generally, things that look like out-of-body experiences is not something I would do in our laboratory because I don't want to scare anybody. That I don't want a person to have the experience where they tell management, Targ separated my consciousness from my body and I can't get integrated again. And that would be the end of our program, because I have no, I've studied a lot of psychology in college, but I have no credentials for separating a person's consciousness from their body. That's major surgery. But with Hella, who is an experienced remote viewer and a friend of mine, I was willing to say, let's go visit Brezhnev's office in the Kremlin. Let's go to Russia. Is off there to the east someplace that's 10 hours in the past. What do you see? What pictures come to mind? And she said, well, I'm walking down a corridor all covered with red carpeting and red brocade on the walls. And at the end of the corridor, there's a door all covered with red leather. See, I'm not going to tell this whole story. And yes, there was a door covered with red leather. And she said lots of other correct things. And we wound up going down a passageway behind Brezhnev's desk. And in this passageway, Hella was describing a computer network terminal, big computer room. And I began to feel frightened. As though I was being surveilled. I felt I have a lot of clearances, but I have no clearance to be in the computer room in the Kremlin. That was outside my clearance range. So I said, I think that we've told them a lot of different things. Let's end it here. So that would be an instance where I either sensed that I was being surveilled or was suffering from paranoia. But 2 years later, I got to go to the Kremlin and was allowed to visit Brezhnev's office and verify that indeed almost everything she said was correct. Big desk, windows on the left, desk on the right, so forth. Red leather on the doors, all entirely correct. I did not ask to go down the passageway behind his desk, but I felt that I was privileged to be able to see directly that almost everything she said about the whole experience was correct. But I have no way to verify whether my flash of fear was paranoia for being in the basement of the Kremlin or whether somebody was actually aware that we were there. So the answer to the question is I don't know.
I think it's probably fair to say, Russell, though, that we don't have, to my knowledge, any way to block clairvoyance or ESP or remote viewing.
I don't know of any way to block that. If you feel you're being attacked, you should get into physical activity. Diane Fortune wrote a book called Psychic Self-Defense. She wrote that in the 30s. Because in Brazil, for example, if somebody's mad at you, they can set fire to your house or make you sick. And that's ordinary. There's a lot of psychic physical attack. I was at a conference for a week in Sao Paulo, and we had a whole day on psychic self-defense and what to do if somebody's attacking you. And people consider, these are all researchers, because it's considered a big problem what to do if you're attacked by Umbanda, the bad guys who will go after you. I think that there are probably more than one book now on psychic self-defense. What Diane Fortune, an English writer, recommended is that you should stop spending so much time in your mental body and get into your physical body. Go play tennis, go bowling, go for a hike, stop meditating, get in your physical body, and shut the door on the psychic path. I don't know if that's a correct answer, but that's what people that on the street, that's what they recommend.
Here's another change of pace question, and I know it's an area that you're eager to get into. Black Eagle asks, why is being able to predict something at slightly above chance, and I'll expand on that to say, and to do remote viewing also even highly above chance, why is that spiritually valuable?
Well, that's sort of a complicated question. It's being in forecasting the future per se is not spiritually valuable, which is why you sort of threw me a curve. It's valuable to discover who you are with regard to not being entirely a physical body. That if you think that who you are is what you see in the mirror in the morning, then you're in for a lot of suffering, because it means that you're a physical body. And as we all know, what you see in the mirror in the morning changes every year to year. You're not nearly as cute as you used to be a decade ago in general. So that kind of attachment is the road to suffering. And Buddhists have been writing about this for thousands of years. The idea that it's desirable to recognize, and Ramana Maharshi, who's right in front of me on my wall, is a contemporary teacher of Advaita Vedanta. Advaita means no separation. It's the idea that Ramana Maharshi has his principal teaching, figure out who you are by experiencing. If you don't know who you are, you're in for a lot of suffering. And Longchen Rabjan, who's a 12th century Buddhist teacher, wrote in plain English, no religious context at all, that who you are is timeless awareness. That is to say, your nature is such that your consciousness can move into space and move into time without cognizance of how far into time or how far into space you're moving. And what he said, what Longchen Rabjan, his friends call him Longchampa, what he wrote in several books, 12th century, that because your awareness is timeless, you're not limited, your conscious thoughts are not limited by cause and effect. The idea that you are free of cause and effect because your consciousness is timeless. This is very advanced writing for the 12th century. It's like he's writing about relativity 800 years before Einstein. And his predecessor, Padmasambhava, who's on the wall with a shawl behind me, Padmasambhava wrote in the 8th century, he wrote a book that looks like it's something quite contemporary called Self-Liberation Through Seeing with Naked Awareness. What Longchampa called timeless awareness, his Padmasambhava called naked awareness, but both of them are talking about the fact that your nature is outside of space and time, and that you are free to experience in your daily life or in your dreams, or in your remote viewing, you have access to moving outside of time and outside of space. The most interesting thing that I could tell you about remote viewing is that it is no harder to look far into the future than it is to describe something contemporaneous. And it's no harder to describe something in Soviet Siberia than it is to describe something across the street. So increasing the distance in time, increasing the distance in the future does not make it harder. Your psychic perception in remote viewing is independent of space and time, and that's the truth. And we have thousands of trials to demonstrate that, very high quality data, that remote viewing is independent of space and time. And the most interesting thing that I know is that this particular timeless awareness is very, very well documented. And the reason that that's spiritually valuable to know is that it's true. It gives yourself a handle on the true nature of consciousness, so that when you put your head on the pillow at night, you are free to move out into space and time. Carl Jung wrote about that in Dreams, Memories, and Reflections, that he had this profound out-of-body experience where he just was sitting in his chair and he just moved out into space and could suddenly see the whole universe, including the moon and the earth. And that changed his whole view of space-time and the nature of human beings. So if you realize that you're inherently a being independent of space and time, it's much more freeing than thinking that you're limited to what you see in the mirror.
Here's a question from Brian Kramer.
Does that answer the question, Jeffrey? That's all right.
I thought that was a very good answer. A very good answer. There are several other questions along these lines relating, the psychic and the spiritual. Brian was asking, are there any major shifts in consciousness that are imminent? Will these shifts come in time to save the planet?
Well, the shifts in the consciousness are not necessarily to the good. We're right now in America experiencing a shift in consciousness overwhelmed by greed. Now, from time to time in the world, greed is won, and all of Asia was overtaken and the societies were destroyed by Genghis Khan. He just went from one ocean to the other, killed millions of people because he could. We've just had an experience in America where we had a president who was doing evil things from which he derived no great benefit, and he just did all these terrible things because he could. So I don't see any evidence that the future is going to get better than what it is right now.
Okay. Here's another question relating spirituality to the psychic work. Nikki Tesla asks, could you elaborate as to how your work with the CIA impacted your spiritual development?
Well, that's sort of a humorous question, that is, working with the CIA is not going to help your spiritual development. From my point of view, I liked working for the CIA. I worked with these two guys who were in our film. Kit Green and Ken Kress were both highly intelligent, ethical, as far as our program was concerned. They were friends of the field. Consequently, their suggestions were very apropos. They gave us money, and by and large, they let us do what we wanted to do. So my relationship, my experience for a decade with the CIA was quite positive. I had lots of things that I wanted to do, and they let us do it. And consequently, we had a very, very successful decade. I started to enumerate some of those things. We worked with Pat Price, and he had to find where Hal was hiding for 9 days in a row, and out of those 9 days, 7 out of those 9 days, he correctly described where Hal was, so correctly that a psychologist was able to look at the transcript and find out where he was 7 out of the 9 times. So it's as though in our first run of formal experiments, if Hal was kidnapped 9 days in a row, the psychic would have found where he was kidnapped to 7 out of those 9 times. And we published that in Nature. The CIA then wanted us to work with a control. So I asked my friend Hella Hammond, who had never done this before. Hella is a very amiable, intelligent, friendly woman, professional photographer, and her credential for doing this is she had never done anything psychic before. This is all new to her and made her a control. And it turned out, doing 9 trials with her, she was 10 times more psychic than Pat Price. So Hella data was significant at odds of 1 in a million, where Price is the most psychic man in the world, was significant at 1 in 100,000. And we then published Hella's data in the Proceedings of the Engineering Society. And the Army then became interested in our work. And we were invited to start a psychic program so that the Army didn't have to come to California to find stuff. And Hal and I chose 6 people from a group of 30 in an Army cafeteria. And I did similar, in all of these things, my job at SRI was the interviewer. So we did 36 trials, and I would sit with the person, and week after week, they would have to describe where somebody was hiding, usually Hal. I don't drive. So I was a stay-at-home person, and Hal was the traveler. And in those 36 trials, with completely inexperienced Army officers, came in with their leather jackets and their boots, say, okay, what do I do? They were again successful at 1 in a million. So in our work at SRI, with a self-proclaimed psychic like Pat Price, a control person like Hella, 6 people who didn't know anything about psychic stuff at all of them were highly significant experiments at odds of 100,000 to 1 or 1 in a million. So we saw a lot of very great psychic things. Then when I left SRI, we did a similar experiment forecasting changes in the silver commodity market, working with an experienced psychic. And each week for 9 weeks in a row, we had to forecast whether the price of silver would go up a little, up a lot, down a little, or down a lot. And all 9 of those forecasts were correct. And we made $120,000 in the silver market. Following year, we were not successful. So I don't mean to tell you that this always works. Our protocol got changed in a number of bad ways. And we got greedy. Our investor wanted to do things twice as fast, meaning that the viewer did not get feedback for his trial number 1 until after he did trial number 2. And that was a bad protocol, and we were not successful. But with a good protocol and complete trust among the participants, remote viewing can be highly successful, highly reliable.
So to go back to the original question, though, all of this work, financial forecasting for the Army, for the CIA, do you think it had any impact at all on your spiritual development, Russell? And I might mention as well, since it's just after the top of the hour, we'll continue until 1:30. the hour?
I would say the fact that it was the CIA did not affect me one way or the other. The fact that I was sitting in the dark helping people be psychic for a decade certainly helped me with my psychic ability, because I was sitting in a psychic domain for 10 years, helping people basically psychically. As you got to remember, I don't know the answer. So if I'm helping you get the answer, I have to be in touch with you, attuned to your tone of voice, attuned to what you're saying. I don't know what the answer is, but I can help you keep on the track. So consequently, I became very sensitive to what psychic functioning sounds like.
Here's a very interesting question from Matthew Gray. What is the most pressing issue you feel needs attention and help right now?
Well, what comes to mind is so I'm living here in California, which is going to be a desert. The climate change is a certain thing that's going to radically change everything in our lives. And people have to be attending to that rather than pretending it doesn't exist. So I think if you had another decade of Donald Trump, the country is guaranteed to be into a state of privation and despair. I don't know what can be done, but that's obviously the most serious problem on the horizon. I don't know how Stephen Schwartz is doing a remote viewing experiment looking into the future to 2050 and 2060 to see with hundreds and hundreds of viewers to see what the future is going to look like. And one of the things that it looked like is Los Angeles was underwater. So I think that precognitive remote viewing can give us information about what the likely future is. Precognition tells you about the likely future. I don't believe that it is immutable. For example, if you have a dream of driving your car and in the dream the wheel falls off. I've just lost are you still there, Jeffrey?
I'm here.
Can you see me?
I can see you.
Because you've disappeared. Maybe I don't have to.
I'm here. I see you. Everything's fine to my knowledge.
I just got a screen that says, here are tips how to work like a pro.
Oh, well, I think everything is fine. Maybe it's just something on your screen, Russell. On my screen, everything is good.
Maybe I shouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
That's shocking.
Something popped up on your screen, that's all. Well, should we move on to another question?
Let's see. On precognition, that just shocked me. I had no precognitive idea, and there's no way for me to get rid of it. Anyway, if you have a dream that the wheel's going to fall off your car, I believe that you can take your car into the garage, and the experience would be that the mechanic would say, my gosh, good you brought in. All the nuts are loose on the wheel. Your wheel's about to fall off, but I can fix that. So I think that you can, and there are cases of that. Elizabeth Rauscher told me a case just like that. So I believe that you can have a precognitive dream of a calamitous event and take action to mitigate the event.
Okay. Armando Solorzano is asking if you've witnessed psychic healing. What is your impression about work in psychic healing?
Well, I think the psychic healing is quite real. The first person that I worked with in the psychic domain at all was Dora Kunz, who was the president of the Theosophical Society in New York. And she was also the first person to talk about the therapeutic touch, which nurses now do, where they hold a hand over a person who is ill, and their healing intention is very efficacious. So they now have huge conferences worldwide about therapeutic touch, which they now call some kind of therapeutic non-touch, because they discover you don't have to actually touch the person. So she was starting to see, I knew Dora Kunz in the 1950s. So it's been going on 50 years of therapeutic touch going on in the hospital situation. And nurses are very in favor of that. And my daughter, Elizabeth, is a psychiatrist, did an experiment where she had half a dozen healers around the United States sending healing intention for 30 of her 60 AIDS patients. My daughter was a psychiatrist in the 1990s and had lots of AIDS patients. And the 30 people in her group who were recipients of psychic healing had much better outcomes, fewer trips to the hospital, better self-esteem, better outcomes generally than the people for whom no prayers were sent. No prayers, no energy. And that was published in the Western Medical Journal. And it was the first time they had published a paper dealing with straight up psychic healing. And the people who received the prayers had much better outcomes than the 30 controls. So it was a well done experiment. And William Byrd did a similar experiment with several hundred cardiac patients at San Francisco General Hospital, which was also very successful. So, and William Harris published a big review article on spiritual healing in a medical journal. He was at the Washington University in St. Louis, and he had almost 1,000 instances of laboratories who were investigating psychic healing. So there's now a whole literature, quite a body of data, well-controlled medical data on spiritual healing. So I think the evidence is very strong for something like psychic healing. Now, I say something like psychic healing because we don't really know what it works. That is, it's independent of distance. So again, it's a non-local phenomena. You're just sending the person your psychic intention that they should, as though you're not sending them energy, you're sending them a kind of psychic get well card. And because they now have your healing intention in the mail, they get better. And that seems to work pretty well. There's a lot, I don't mean to minimize, there's a lot of evidence. There are many books written now about spiritual healing and psychic healing, in distant healing. So I think that that's a real thing. And I don't know whether there are conferences on spiritual healing. I know books are being written and papers get published. I don't know if they get together to talk about it though, but the phenomena is real.
Okay, here another change of pace question, and I hear from viewers from time to time who hold this view. Ricardo would like your opinion on the notion that the real power in this world is in the hands of some secret group. Have you ever had any clues in your work that that is the case?
I have not run into any secret groups. I've been a very fortunate child and a fortunate adult. I've gotten to do pretty much whatever I wanted to do, unless I'm aligned with the secret group, which is always possible. When I wanted to begin this program, I went to top level people in the CIA and NASA, and they said, "That sounds cool. How much money do you need?" And we started the program. And we may be on the right track. You see, we had millions of dollars to do our research at a time when parapsychologists did not have anything like that amount of money. And we also were getting data that was 10 times more significant than what other parapsychologists were seeing. That is, that's enough said. That we would typically do 9 trials or 30 trials and get data that was odds of 1 in a million, 1 in 100,000. And parapsychologists typically have to do millions of trials or hundreds of thousands of trials and don't even get as good data as we were seeing. We wanted to publish an addendum to our paper before it was published in the Proceedings of the IEEE. We knew that their precognition was creeping into our experiment. So we said, how many precognition remote viewing trials do we have to do? We don't have a lot of time to spend. The paper is almost in galleys. And we said, well, if we did 4 trials and they were all perfect, judged perfectly, then that would be a significant, weakly significant, but like 0.02. So it was not a strong result, but if it worked, we could then publish that, adding to all of our other things. Of course, if we missed one, then that would upset our whole paper and we would have to report a failed experiment, of which we had none up to that point. But the psychic bubble we were living in, we believed that working with Hella, if we did 4 experiments where each day Hella had to describe at 9 o'clock where Hal would be 3 hours later, she'd be able to do that. In fact, all 4 of our experiments were excellently described and matched up perfectly, and we published the result. So for our decade, we assumed that whatever we were going to do would be successful, and our assumptions were rewarded. So if there was a secret cabal helping us, we're very grateful.
Here's an interesting question coming in, Russell, about your brother-in-law, Bobby Fischer. Did you ever work with him to help him in his chess career? And what is your opinion about his mental strength and psychological insight?
Well, that's a complicated question. Bobby was, in my opinion, the greatest chess player there's ever been, because in going up to the finals before he got to play Spassky, he had to play 3 other grandmasters, and in his first 2 series against the grandmasters, Bobby won every single game in the series, and that has never been done before or since. Nobody had ever seen a series where you win 6-0 and dispose of a grandmaster. So that was chess playing. People, that's not a secret, but people don't talk about that. See, because my life has been involved in doing statistics, when I see something like in a ball game or World Series or something, or I see something clearly never happened before, it's worth enunciating. Fischer was playing chess at a game superior to anybody that there's ever been. And enough said about that. In his dealing with me, he is quite amiable. His success was largely due to the fact that he had outstanding spatial visualization and spatial memory, as did his father. His father was a mathematician who wrote a book on spatial visualization and was interested in the mathematics of spatial visualization. And Bobby's memory of that was without peer. In playing rapid game, where all your moves have to be made within 5 minutes, he would never lose because he could remember every game he's ever played like that and totally overcome the person. But in Rapid's game, where everybody had 5 minutes, Bobby didn't need 5 minutes because within a minute, he knew what the outcome was going to be. So he was playing chess at a level unlike anybody ever before or since.
We've got an interesting question here from somebody called Fern Dog, who says, I know a former U.S. Army psychiatrist who, he claims, worked on the remote viewing programs of the early 1980s. He tells me that the programs were scrapped because they simply didn't work. Can you comment on this?
Well, he's wrong. And the reason you know that he's wrong is that we were getting a couple of $1 million a year from the CIA, and the CIA is not easily amused. They would not be giving psychics in California a couple of $1 million a year for 25 years if we weren't doing something useful. I mean, the fact that we published refereed work in the premier journals in the world, IEEE and Nature, usually will be evidence that what we were doing is true. But I think the strongest evidence that what we were doing was true is the fact that the CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency supported us for 2 decades, doing more or less the same thing in service to them. And to say, and in addition, the Fort Meade group, where you had a dozen Army remote viewers doing several hundred remote viewing tasks over a decade, mainly for CIA and DIA, were in business continuously for 10 years with a dozen viewers and support, all doing remote viewing. I could say other things, but I think that's strongly indicates that what we were doing is true. There were people who didn't like what we were doing because they thought that it was work for the Antichrist, that we were certainly doing things psychically and in the spiritual domain, but the church didn't like the scientists getting into the domain of the spirit. And Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for that in 1600. Bruno was a pantheist in addition to being an astronomer. As an astronomer, he felt that there were that the stars in the sky were all suns with other planets like the Earth spinning around them. So he followed the idea of a solar-centric world. And he felt that there were countless other solar systems, and that the divine, that God was in all things. There was not a unique God, but God filled all of space-time. And at that time, the agreement was with the Renaissance that a scientist was allowed to do science, but he better stay out of religion. And Giordano Bruno, who was really a genius in his time, writing very imaginatively about spiritual things and very correctly about astronomy, in 1600, he was killed. So that was a very frightening experience for Galileo, who of course came along 20 years later doing similar things. So Galileo was very cautious as to what he said.
So you're suggesting that the remote viewing program was ended for similar reasons as Giordano Bruno being burnt at the stake?
You could say that. That's a stretch. I wouldn't have quite put it that way. The CIA was being teased. There were people in Congress who felt that our program was supported by the Antichrist. That was said to me directly by the CIA when I was there. We were dealing with people who said that just that we were that this was. I can't remember. That's not my lingo in general. So we were what we were doing was unchristian. Was bad. Was bad theology, and it scared. The idea that CIA was worried about losing their support for other programs. And it won't surprise you to know that there are crazy people in Congress who can say all kinds of crazy things with religious overtones. So by 1995, CIA was getting bad vibrations from Congress that they should give up that satanic program that they were doing.
Okay, well, we've got another 5 minutes to go. And speaking of combining science and theology, I have a question from Baria, who asks about remote viewing the afterlife. Have you ever been involved with that, or do you know of any instances?
It's an interesting question. That is, I don't know. People certainly have contact with deceased persons. My daughter Elizabeth died unfortunately when she was 40, and she was a very, very intuitive, very psychic woman, in addition to being a brilliant psychiatrist and physician and researcher. And many people have had messages from Elizabeth carrying information that I could then verify as being true. So that there are people who are in contact, or at least up until recent years, have been in contact with my deceased daughter. Now, and one of the people even got a message from Elizabeth written in Russian, and the woman didn't read Russian, so Elizabeth had to spell it out for her one syllable at a time, and we could then verify that what she wrote was an apropos message to her husband. So Elizabeth has provided very detailed, accurate, correct information since her death. Now, I don't think it would be. I don't think any of the people who are communicating with her would say that they're remote viewing Elizabeth. The action seems to be from the deceased person to the medium or to the open mind. But I don't have. The reason I'm not participating in Bigelow's contest is that I have no first-person experience with that. Nobody comes to visit me from the deceased world, so I don't have any first-person data to contribute.
Of course, if one studies the spiritualist literature, you will find all kinds of accounts of people purporting to be clairvoyant or working with mediums and providing accounts of the afterlife.
So I can say one last thing. The essay application is sent to Robert Bigelow, and what I would search on is best evidence for survival after life. That's the name of his website. I don't have the URL.
Or the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies for people.
Yeah, this is a $1 million contest. I think he has 4 or 5 rewards for people who win. And they're dividing up $1 million among them.
Well, Russell, it's been a great pleasure to have you on this live stream. I hope we can do it again in the future. We've gotten lots of great questions, so I want to thank all of the viewers for being with us, and I'd like to thank you for sharing so generously of your time and your insights. It's been a wonderful experience. We're at just about the bottom of the hour right now, so I think it's time to end the live stream, and I want to encourage people who are viewing who are not yet subscribers to the weekly newsletter of New Thinking Allowed. If you go to the New Thinking Allowed Foundation, which is New Thinking Allowed, ALLOWED, all one word, .org, you can subscribe for free to our weekly newsletter. And now I am going to end the live stream. There, and we've done it. And